Hi, everyone. All right, welcome back. We're continuing discussing Michel Foucault's Madness and Civilization. And today we are focusing on the fourth and fifth chapters, primarily the fourth chapter, Passion and Delirium, but also aspects of madness. So we've seen sort of this historical development of madness and the treatment of the mad, right? The movement from the idea of madness as folly in the early Renaissance to this sort of transformed conception of madness by the end of the Renaissance, the beginning of the classical period, and then moving into the modern period, where madness sort of represents this otherworldly kind of possession almost, and it's associated with death and sort of oblivion. And we saw that, sort of more importantly, the way society deals with madness and the way that changes, right? So at the beginning of the Renaissance, we have the ship of fools, where the mad are literally sent out into the ocean on a boat together. And then that form of sort of exclusion, the exclusion of the mad from society, is transformed into this new form of exclusion, which Foucault calls confinement, right? The great confinement of the mad. And as he says, it's not just the insane who are confined along with the mad, but all these other people who sort of have qualities that align with the concept of madness. So not only the sort of clinically insane, but also the idle or the excessively arrogant or egotistical, the lazy. Right? They're all sort of grouped with the mad and excluded from society, confined. Right? So madness becomes a kind of cover to do away with, to exclude any element of society that is sort of inconvenient or exposes the flaws in a society. Right? What do you do when the poor are outside yelling for alms? You say, well, this is a form of madness, and you put them in an insane asylum. Right? But so in chapter 4, Foucault is getting deeper into sort of really the theory of what madness is. There's a pretty marked tone shift from chapter 3 to chapter 4, and I think, although Foucault is still in chapter 4 very much analyzing classical ideas about what madness is, what constitutes madness, the origins of madness, he is also, I think, coming closer to his own sort of theory of madness. So maybe I'll say a little bit more about that later on. But I think in chapter 4 we can see something closer to Foucault's own thinking. Not to say necessarily that he agrees with the classical understanding of madness, but rather that he's interested in sort of taking the side of the classical conception of madness in order to juxtapose that concept of madness with the modern clinical medical conception of madness. In any case, so in chapter 4, Foucault is interested in explaining, among other things, the origins of madness. Where does madness come from? Why does madness occur? What is madness, really? So he's thinking not just about the things that people call madness, but really sort of the real phenomenon of madness, right? Not just excessive arrogance or idleness or folly of some kind, but sort of true, what we would today call mental illness, true madness, right? The truth of madness. And this is a formulation that he insists on in chapter 4, right? The truth of madness and true madness are what he's after. And that in itself is an interesting formulation, right? The truth of madness, true madness. Madness, we might think, is the absence of truth, the absence of reality. And in some senses, it is. But there is, as Foucault is examining here, kind of truth that is revealed from madness, truth that madness reveals about ourselves. So he begins this questioning about the origin of madness, the nature of true madness, by pointing out one of the sort of foundations of madness, what you might call the condition for the possibility of madness. And he's thinking about this sort of conceptually, right? He is thinking about madness as a concept. And, from what resources do we kind of construct the concept of madness? That's kind of Foucault's question. And the first, right, the chapter is called Passion and Delirium. The first source of madness is passion itself. So passion, right, is understood by not just classical philosophy, but really all philosophy prior to the beginning of modern philosophy and long after. Passion is understood as the sort of unity of body and soul. So what is passion? Right? By the passions, Foucault is referring to what we today would more likely call emotions. Right? The passions are the emotions. And the passions occupy a strange place within human being. They're called passions because they are passive. They are not the active part of our soul. They are the passive part of our soul. They're the part of our soul that we are not really in control of. Right? So in the same way that we aren't in control of our bodily functions, right? We aren't able to control the fact that we get hungry, that we need to eat, that we need to sleep, that we need shelter and clothing and all of those necessities. Right? So the body is sort of an obstacle to the soul. It's the means by which the soul is able to exist, but with respect to the body, the soul doesn't get to make any decisions, right? The body experiences its needs passively. The activity of the soul is just that, activity. Right? It is to think, to judge, to make decisions, to act. Right? And since there is no action required in order to make us hungry, make us tired, those experiences are passive experiences. Right? We don't do anything to bring them about. They are experiences, however, of the body. Our hunger is a physical sensation. Fatigue is a physical sensation, right? They're bodily experiences. However, right, the emotions, the passions, are also passive, meaning we don't choose to experience the emotion that we're feeling. We don't choose to be angry. We don't choose to be jealous, or in love. Right? These are things that come over us. We are passive in them. And so they are sort of bodily in that sense, right? In the sense that they're passive, that they affect the soul rather than the soul affecting them. And yet, right, emotions, unlike hunger, heat or cold, physical sensations, passions are of the soul, right? They affect the soul. They occupy the soul. Hunger occupies the body, but anger, for example, occupies the soul. It is of the soul, a phenomenon of the soul. And so passions represent the passivity of the soul. In that sense, right, the passions represent the meeting of soul and body. Right? If we think about this, so the traditional framework for understanding this is Plato's description of a tripartite structure of the human being, where we have the body on the bottom of this tripartite hierarchy, and on the top of it we have the soul or the mind. The body is physical. It is entirely, passive in the sense that we just mentioned. And the soul is this free, active, and intentional consciousness, right? It's the soul where the proper being of human being lies, right? In that active, conscious judgment, decision making. But for Plato, between the body and the soul, the mind, lies this intermediary moment, this intermediary stage, which is what he calls spirit. And spirit is where the emotions lie. Spirit is where the passions lie. Spirit is intermediary between the body and the soul. And so emotion is, in one sense, intellectual. I'm angry because of something. And yet, I experience that anger not simply as a thought, right? I'm conscious of something that is an injustice to me, right? And I analyze it and I judge it rationally, intellectually. No, right? I experience that as an emotion. I experience it both actively as a judgment and passively as an emotion. And that emotion is sort of the unifying of mind and body, the way the thought excites and is manifested within the body. So this unity of mind and body in emotion is absolutely essential for understanding the origin of madness and the meaning of madness, what madness is in Foucault's account here. But let's think about this for a minute, because it's actually very interesting to think about how emotion works, right? And to think about that in relation to what madness is and how madness works. So emotion begins with an idea, right? As I just said. I think something, and it makes me angry. I make some kind of judgment, and it makes me angry, right? I, in my consciousness, encounter something that I love or that I hate, or that I have some other more complex emotion about. It begins then in the mind. But that thought, that pure idea, at the level of mere or simple intellectual recognition of something, there is then this strange attendant passion or feeling that's different than the idea, that impacts and affects my way of thinking and my bodily behavior. When you get really angry, it begins with some conscious judgment. That person just insulted me. I recognize it intellectually as an insult. And then it gets taken up and manifested in the body, or rather in the spirit, as emotion, as anger. How does that anger manifest itself? It is going to sort of reach out in two directions. It's going to reach out into your mind. Your anger is going to cloud your ability to think. The spirit is capable of overwhelming the mind. When you become really angry, you start to think differently. You fixate on something. You obsess about something. You obsess about revenge or getting justice or something along those lines. Similarly, if you're jealous or if you're in love, right? You fixate, you become obsessed. Your modes of thinking, sort of paths of your thinking change. So this passion has the ability to sort of overwhelm your thinking. And as part of that, it also will affect your body. Right? You, in extreme anger or in extreme love or desire, you may not feel hunger. You may feel heat or cold in different ways. You are going to act differently. Maybe you're pacing. Maybe you're catatonic. You can't move. You experience some kind of paralysis. And so this passion sort of floods the engine of your whole being and disturbs both mind and body. Now, this is why for Plato, justice and ethics and sort of the whole point of being human is learning to master your emotions through your mind. Right? And that's not an incidental comment, right? Because what sanity is, what rationality often is simply the ability to master your passions, to master your emotions, to not be governed by the passions, but to be governed by your mind, right? By ideas. Now, we see these essential ideas first mentioned on page 86, right, where he writes at the very top, before Descartes, and long after his influence as philosopher and physiologist had diminished, passion continued to be the meeting ground of body and soul. At the point where the latter's activity makes contact with the former's passivity, each being a limit imposed upon the other and the locus of their communication. He says, in thinking about madness, one in the modern period, in the classical period, wanted to treat madness with what he calls, in the final paragraph of 86, a kind of medicine of spirits. And this is an important point because we're going to see this idea of the spirits come back again and again, right? Specifically in Aspects of Madness, chapter 5, where he's talking about the descriptions of melancholy and mania. Madness is described as, in terms of a movement of spirits, right? Often, right, these spirits are referred to as bile. So melancholia is a movement of black bile, right? an excess of black bile, buildup of bile. Literal spirits, these spirits that are, sort of one part physical, but also one part sort of emotional and intellectual. An intermediary between the physical and the intellectual. So whenever Foucault is talking about spirits, whenever these classical philosophers are talking about spirits, they're making use of this Platonic concept of spirit as an intermediary between mind and body. So let's read a little bit more about this on page 88. Madness in the classical conception is the tension and release of these spirits, right? These spirits within us. It's maybe this is going to be a kind of tangent-filled lecture, but this is why alcohol is called spirits also. Alcohol affects both mind and body in the same way that madness does, in the same way that emotion does, right? Alcohol affects your motility, your ability to move, but also your mind, right? It makes your paths of thinking change, your neural networks change. And so because it acts on both body and mind, it's a spirit. And we can, think of Freud talking about alcohol in that regard also. But in any case, right, so now I'm on page 88 and thinking about madness as the movement of spirits, the tension and release of spirits, the hardening and softening, the rigidity, the relaxation of these spirits. That is what causes madness. And he says, passion is no longer exactly at the geometrical center of the body and soul complex. It is a little short of that, at the point where their opposition is not yet given, in that region where both their unity and their distinction are established. Right? So madness comes from, passion, but also madness, comes from this part of ourselves where mind and body are not yet distinguished from each other. Now, that is a very interesting comment. As we saw in Descartes, the whole project of modern philosophy, certainly the project of Cartesian philosophy, is an attempt to reconcile mind and body. It begins from the mind-body problem, the assumption that mind and body are fundamentally separate. This is one of the central questions of philosophy in general. How do ideas and bodies relate to each other? This is the problem ultimately of transcendence. How does an idea affect the physical world? And it is sort of the essential problem of ethics also. And how can I rule my emotions? How can I be in control of myself? How do I direct myself to do the things that I mean to do? So if, and I think Foucault's right here, but if Foucault is right, that passion represents this most central inner unity of our being, a place where mind and body are not separate, are not yet separate, aren't even distinguished from each other, then passion is going to be sort of the central force of our being, right? How are we unified? What unifies mind and body? Passion. So this is not really the way that classical philosophers thought of passion. Passion was something that needed to be ruled by the mind. The mind was more in touch with reality. The mind was the executive highest function of human being. And therefore, if passion did seem to unify mind and body in some way, it was in a negative sense. It was in the sense that it clouded the mind with bodily things. But here Foucault is I think, sort of limning a different possibility, which is to understand passion as really the most fundamental way of being for us, and that is prior to both mind and body, the conceptions of mind and body, that we aren't able to distinguish mind or body without first understanding or experiencing passion. So he goes on page 88 in the middle. But at this level, passion is no longer simply one of the causes, however powerful, of madness. Rather, it forms the basis for its very possibility. If it is true that there exists a realm in the relations of soul and body where cause and effect, determinism and expression still intersect in a web so dense that they actually form only one and the same movement, which cannot be dissociated except after the fact. If it is true that prior to the violence of the body and the vivacity of the soul, prior to the softening of the fibers and the relaxation of the mind, there are qualitative, as yet unshared kinds of a priori, which subsequently impose the same values on the organic and on the spiritual, then we see that there can be diseases such as madness, which are from the start diseases of the body and of the soul. Maladies in which the affection of the brain is of the same quality, of the same origin, of the same nature, finally, as the affection of the soul. The possibility of madness, therefore, is implicit in the very phenomenon of passion. All right, so this is a very dense quote here. But let's unpack this a little bit. I recommend bringing your books out and looking at page 88 here, this second to last paragraph. Passion is the possibility for madness, the possibility of a holistic being of ourselves. Now, what Foucault does not say here, but what is, I think, implied, is that by the same token, if passion is the condition for the possibility of madness as something that unites body and soul, we might also wonder if passion is not also then the condition for the possibility of reason, of rationality, of sanity. Insofar as sanity implies a holistic unity between mind and body, right? The ability for mind to rule body, to rule emotions, then that possibility for holism, whether that holism is achieved through madness or sanity, that holism is made possible only through the passions, that which unites body and soul. So, I'm going to be pushing Foucault in this direction, but I don't think I have to push very much. What he is setting up here is the possibility that madness and sanity are with respect to our ways of being, and even perhaps with respect to the world, only different in terms of their goals. Now, we'll have an opportunity to return to that thought several times, but so let's leave off there for now. But this is an interesting set of observations about passion. Right? Uh, so, if passion is the condition for the possibility of madness, then madness is this movement of spirits at the center of our being. It comes from that most profound part of ourselves, which, right, and I use that word profound in all of its connotations, right, in the same way that Foucault will, right, in the sense of profundity, of deepness, and of darkness. Right? This whole discourse about darkness and light that crops up at the end of Passion and Delirium, this chapter, is about this darkness at the center of our being where mind and body are unified, and the relations to light. Anyway, we'll talk more about those metaphors in a minute, but let's stay with this passage for one more second. Think about this dark center of our being from which madness arises. If it is true that there exists a realm in the relations of soul and body where cause and effect, determinism and expression still intersect in a web so dense that they actually form only one and the same movement, which cannot be dissociated except after the fact. In this deepest part of ourselves, this realm of the relations of soul and body, there is a web so dense that determinism and expression, right, causation, freedom, that is to say, passivity and activity, form one and the same movement. Passivity and activity cannot be dissociated at this deepest level. What counts as active, what counts as passive in this profundity of the relations of soul and body is not distinguished. So that mind and body are unified, right? To say mind and body are unified is to say, right, determinism and expression, passivity and activity are not distinguished. So that we could say, right, our emotions at this deepest level are active, right? We are hunger in the same way that we are thinking judgment. We do choose to be hungry in the sense that we are hungry, in the sense that we choose to be. And we don't choose to make judgments, to think, to be active, but that activity is also passive in the sense that our thoughts wash across us not so differently than emotions do. So Foucault is identifying passion as this place that destroys uh, this structure of the human being, body, spirit, mind. And it is only from this deep unity that such a differentiation of body, spirit, and mind can in the first place become possible. And from this deep place that madness can become possible. Okay. So, if it is true, then there are qualitative, as yet unshared kinds of a priori, which subsequently impose the same values on the organic and on the spiritual. These unshared a priori are the conditions of our being that make it possible for something like rationality or madness to act on both the organic, the body, and the spiritual, the mind. All right. So passion is conditioned for madness, and passion is even a kind of mini madness. Right? We'll hear Plato talk about this. Right? This is not so uncommon. Right? In a fit of rage, one is temporarily insane. Right? In when one is lovesick, one is sort of temporarily hysterical, temporarily insane. So passion is itself a kind of mini madness, but it's not madness truly. Madness is something different. Right? So the question is now, what makes madness proper? So on page 91, Foucault begins to explain what distinguishes madness from passion. Madness, which finds its first possibility in the phenomenon of passion and in the deployment of that double causality which, starting from passion itself, radiates both toward the body and toward the soul, is at the same time suspension of passion, breach of causality, dissolution of the elements of this unity. Madness participates both in the necessity of passion and in the anarchy of what, released by this very passion, transcends it and ultimately contests all it implies. Madness ends by being a movement of the nerves and muscles so violent that nothing in the course of images, ideas, or wills seems to correspond to it. So, passion is like a kind of madness, small madness, but madness transcends passion and contests all it implies. What does this mean? So passion is within sanity, within a reasonable person. Passion is a sort of upwelling of the irrational, of unreason, right? It's an important term in this book, unreason. Passion is an example of unreason, an instance of unreason, where one behaves rashly, where one behaves impulsively, a kind of interruption of the pure calculative rationality and intentionality of life, but still in the broad scheme of things, a rational interruption, right? It's only natural, and by natural we mean rationally understandable, to have certain emotional reactions. Right? It's natural and understandable to be jealous when your ex is, making out with someone else in front of you. Choose your example, whatever, right? A natural outburst of passion, of emotion. And that naturalness can be reduced to the rational structure of the human being. Right? We are, after all, embodied rationalities that do experience emotion. We can't escape emotion, and therefore sort of momentary lapses into unreason are inevitable, natural, to be expected by a rational person. Right, passion is natural. It follows a rational chain of cause and effect. Somebody insults you, you get angry, right? You may behave rashly, you may lose your temper, lose your cool rationality, but nevertheless, I explain that emotion by cause and effect. That's the key. My passions are understandable. Madness, though it arises from passion, from the place where passion exists, madness transcends it and contests all it implies. Madness means that the emotions are not caused by the things that we would expect them to be caused by. Madness implies a disorder of the passions. The mad do not react to insults the way the sane do. The mad do not experience jealousy or love the way the sane do. What causes those emotions in the sane does not cause those emotions in the mad. And therefore, madness contests the place of passion within human experience, contests the causal relation between, it contests causal relations of emotions, right? The rational grasp on what emotion is and should be is contested by madness. So, right, what madness contests is not rationality, but rather a proper emotional response to reality. Right? And this lack of proper causality in emotions, Foucault here calls a kind of anarchy. Right? Madness sows a kind of anarchy. Now, this is very interesting, right? That what establishes order as opposed to anarchy is not, again, rationality in itself, but the proper ordering of emotions. What constitutes anarchy and disorder is not illogic or irrationality, strictly speaking, but instead having the wrong emotional reactions to things. So, what's happening in madness when someone has the wrong emotional reactions to things? Page 92, Foucault explains a little bit. Indeed, this dissociation between the external movements of the body and the course of ideas, the dissociation between act and thought, right? Thought, I've been insulted. Act, I'm angry, and I'm going to, respond as a rational person would do. That causality, say that causality is broken, that there's a dissociation between cause, insult, and effect, anger, in madness. Insult and laughter, or love, or ignoring it. Maybe not ignoring it, that would be a rational response, but right, the mad person who, when he's insulted, laughs hysterically and maybe even expresses love to the person. Right? That would be a dissociation. It says this dissociation between external movements of the body and the course of ideas does not mean that the unity of body and soul is necessarily dissolved. These unexpected emotional reactions, these unexpected effects, don't signal that body and soul are no longer united. Right? We might think, oh, well, the thought, I've been insulted, just no longer connects to the emotional substrate, no longer makes the connection that would incite anger. Okay. So, body and soul is not necessarily dissolved, nor that each recovers its autonomy in madness. Doubtless, the unity is compromised in its rigor and in its totality. Okay, so there isn't the same perfect connection, same unity. But it is fissured, it turns out, along lines which do not abolish it, but divide it into arbitrary sectors. So the unity of body and soul is not dissolved, but rather that unity is broken into arbitrary sectors. I think what he means by this is that the unity of body and soul gets carried away by arbitrary phenomena. We'll see this when he's talking about images. Right? One way to understand madness is that the mad have been consumed by an image. And this image sort of carries us away. So let's think about an example of madness. Right? There are many of them, but here's one that Foucault mentions, the famous example of madness, which is the madness of King Charles, I believe. Let me just double check this. Charles VI, thank you. Now known as the Mad King. Indeed, the very historical model for the Mad King of Game of Thrones. Charles VI, um, King of France during the Hundred Years' War, fighting against England. Charles VI suffered from a number of mental illnesses, madnesses, but the most famous was that he believed that he was made of glass. He believed that literally his body was made of glass. Foucault talks about this at some length, this example, right? That he believed that because he was made of glass, he had to avoid hard surfaces, that he was fragile, that he could only, be touched gently. He needed to be on pillows all the time. He believed literally that he was made of glass. And so we can understand this arbitrary fracturing of the unity of body and soul, and it's being carried away by an image in this context, right? So I am taken with the image that my body is glass. I fixate on that image. And it's not then that I am unable to communicate, that my mind is unable to communicate with my body. I don't believe that I'm glass because my mind and body are dissociated from each other. Rather, my mind and body are unified, but they are separated from the rigor and totality of the whole of reality, and are now carried away by this one fragment, this idea, this image of myself as made of glass. So my body and mind continue to work together, but they do so, only within the limited context of this one idea. I'm made of glass. The image, I am glass, eclipses all the rest of reality. And my mind and body are now unified only through this idea that my body is made of glass. My body is glass, and my mind is now going to work to protect my body made of glass. So, I will avoid hard things, right? I will make rational judgments based on the reality that I'm made of glass. So rationality continues. And indeed, the connection between mind and body continues. If somebody throws a pencil at me, I will be furious, right? I will have an emotional reaction based on an intellectual judgment, right? You've thrown a pencil at me, and I judge intellectually that pencil could break me, right? It could make me shatter into 1,000 pieces, and so I get angry at you. And I'm going to make other rational decisions based on this. I'm going to lie on pillows. I'm going to avoid hard surfaces, etc. So mind and body are still united. The passions are still excited by rational judgments, and I'm still able to rule myself. However, that unity is predicated on this not reality itself in its totality, but only on this image, which is false, right? And that's a major part of madness. So we could say that image, myself made of glass, is one of these arbitrary sectors. So passion is one form of unreason that is a foundation for madness. The other phenomenon that indicates or shares some ground with madness is imagination. Imagination is another example of unreason. I can imagine that I'm made of glass, right? And simply by imagining that I'm made of glass, I am not mad. As Foucault says, another example, it would be madness to believe that you are dead. But it's not madness to imagine that you're dead. It's not madness to imagine anything. And yet imagination can often be identical to madness, at least in the short term. I will execute this thought experiment in which I imagine I'm made of glass. And I think about how I would behave, how I would live if I were made of glass. In that imagining, I'm not mad. Madness is instead not the mere thought, but the belief. So, what's the difference between hypothetically imagining that I'm made of glass and then imagining what I would do and believing that I'm made of glass and then acting accordingly? At what point does a hypothesis become a belief? What is a belief? What constitutes a belief? At least one factor in constituting belief would be, again, passion. Now, sorry, I'm just thinking about belief. But let's so what's the difference between imagining something and believing it? I'm avoiding a long tangent here, forgive me. For Foucault, the essential difference is the belief in consequences. If I believe I'm made of glass, if I'm hypothetically imagining that I'm made of glass, I can imagine consequences, but I won't have emotional consequences as a result of it. While I'm imagining that I'm made of glass, if somebody throws a pencil at me, I might imagine that I would be angry if I really believed I were made of glass, or if I were made of glass. But if I truly believe that I'm made of glass and someone throws a pencil at me, well, a pencil doesn't make glass. A rock doesn't break glass. So a rock, right, or something heavy. If I really believe it, that I'm made of glass, then I will not just rationally connect effect and cause. If I believed I were made of glass, you throwing that rock at me would make me angry. The mad person actually has an emotional response to it, right? The mind and body are united in this. It is the unity of mind and body that constitutes belief. I get angry when you throw a rock at me because you could break me. I'm made of glass. So madness means fearing the consequences and experiencing the effects of this unreal scenario. Now, this is where this business of error comes in, and the fundamental error of madness. Right? The difference between imagination and madness is that in imagination, there is no error. It all happens within the realm of hypotheticals. This is truth and untruth in the realm of hypothesis and the realm of imagination. These in logic are known as vacuous truths. I can imagine, for example, that I can say all unicorns are purple, and in formal logic, that proposition counts as true. It is true that all unicorns are purple. And it's true because there is no such thing as a unicorn. And so it is entirely hypothetical, entirely imaginative. And in my imagination, I can posit anything as true. It's a vacuous truth. It has no real consequence. It has no real content. It is nothing because there is no unicorn. So he says on 94, the imagination itself does not err, since it neither denies nor affirms, but is fixed to so great a degree on the simple contemplation of an image. And only the mind can turn what is given in the image into abusive truth, in other words, into error. Right? So it's not an error to say all unicorns are purple. It can only be an error if I'm talking about something real. So madness is different from imagination because it errs. It makes mistakes, right? It gets angry when there's no cause for anger. It fears something that does not exist. It is wrong about reality. It errs with respect to reality. So again on 94, madness is thus beyond imagination, and yet it is profoundly rooted in it. For it consists merely in allowing the image a spontaneous value, total and absolute truth. The image has a spontaneous value, total and absolute truth. I think this is a really nice way to think about madness. Because what it seems to me madness is Foucault's absolutely right? Being struck by an image and being overwhelmed by that image. Granting to that image absolute truth regardless of the reality of it. So, let's think about someone who, for example, believes that they are possessed by an alien spirit. Let's say they are watching a TV show, right? And someone on the TV show says, aliens inhabit people's bodies on Earth, and the only way to get them out is to avoid electricity. right? That image, right? I am inhabited by an alien spirit, seizes on you. And although there's no reason to believe it, there's no cause to think it's true, something about the image in itself, that idea, I'm inhabited by an alien spirit, seizes you, takes a grip of you, and presents itself as total and absolute truth. I don't need to be able to explain why it's true. I don't need to be able to point to a cause. I believe wholly that I am inhabited, and as a part of this image, I believe that I have to avoid electricity. To try to get someone to explain why electricity or the absence of electricity is good for possession would be futile. One can't explain the relationship between effect and cause, right? Why no electricity would be good for getting rid of this alien possession. But that image is so powerful that they then accept that as truth without any evidence or reasoning. No, not without reasoning. Right? Without any grounding in reality. So at least, right. The act of the reasonable man, continuing on 94, who, rightly or wrongly, judges an image to be true or false, is beyond this image, transcends and measures it by what is not itself. Right? So I say, I'm possessed by an alien spirit. You say, why do you think that? And I say, well, because I'm cold and I'm paranoid and I am, overcome by sexual desire. Let's say, that's a good cause, right? I'm overcome by sexual desire and therefore I'm possessed by an alien and I need to escape electricity. A rational person will say, well, being overcome by sexual desire is not evidence that you're possessed by an alien, right? They make a judgment about that image, and they say, well, your reasoning is faulty, right? But how do they do that? They do that by comparing the image of alien possession against other images, right? Against other phenomena within reality. No. Look, lots of people are overcome by sexual desire and they aren't possessed by aliens. Right? It's not unusual. Right? There are plenty of explanations. Right? That's just what it means to be human, or some humans sometimes. Foucault goes on. The act of the madman never oversteps the image presented, but surrenders to its immediacy and affirms it only insofar as it is enveloped by it. Right? So I'm unable to see beyond that image, that idea. It so overpowers me that it now controls me in a certain way. I'm unable to think about anything outside of it or beyond it. I'm unable to compare it to anything. And so I'm unable to judge it accurately. It takes me over. But this is, I think, what the real point is here, that simply because I'm overcome by this image doesn't mean that I cease to be able to think rationally or to use reason. I think the biggest and most important point in this chapter is that, in fact, madness is not without reason. In fact, madness is entirely rational. However, it is a misapplication of reason. So the difference between sanity and madness is not the ability to think rationally, but instead the ability to think rationally in the right way, about the right things, with respect to reality. And what's really interesting and sort of disturbing about that is rationality then doesn't tell us what reality is. We know what reality is and are able to apply reason to reality if we're sane. We don't know what reality is and apply reason to unreality if we are mad. So reason doesn't help us per se distinguish reality from unreality. Rather, reality and unreality help us distinguish between reason and madness. So reason continues to function within madness. Again, on page 94, going on to 95, again we must note that in themselves, right, the reasonings of madmen are neither absurd nor illogical. On the contrary, they apply correctly the most rigorous figures of logic. Syllogism, induction, right? Enthymeme. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word correctly. The mad apply rational thought to their delusions. Right? I have evidence that I am possessed by an alien spirit. That's right. Rational deduction, empirical reasoning. I therefore have to avoid electricity. Right? Rational grasp of cause and effect. A logical, even ethical capacity for judgment and decision making based on what counts as evidence for the mad. Right? Reasoning continues. What's different is the grasp of reality. So, he goes on, not only is there reason in madness, but on 95, the ultimate language of madness is that of reason, but the language of reason enveloped in the prestige of an image, limited to the locus of appearance which the image defines. The inability to go beyond the image, to be overcome by images, the appearing world. I do not have an understanding of sort of deeper workings of reality, of cause and effect, right? To allow images to dictate reason. So to conclude this, right? Madness then is not altogether in the image. Uh, So let's, forgive me, sir. The ultimate language of madness is that of reason, but the language of reason enveloped in the prestige of the image, limited to the locus of appearance which the image defines. It forms, outside the totality of images and the universality of discourse, an abusive, singular organization whose insistent quality constitutes madness. And so it begins with the image. It is dazzled. It is, overcome by the image, the prestige of the image. And then from this image, right, it develops this discourse and reason according to the image. And it then organizes an entire world around this image and mad discourse. And that is madness. Right? Madness is to live in a world that is based in these images and abusive discourses, that is to say, errors, to live in an unreality. Now, how do I know I'm living in reality? How do I know that I'm not mad? This takes us back to Descartes again. But he continues, madness then is not altogether in the image, which of itself is neither true nor false, neither reasonable nor mad, nor is it further in the reasoning which is mere form, revealing nothing but the indubitable figures of logic. And yet madness is in one and in the other, in a special version of the figure of the relationship. So, right, madness develops its own discourse, its own logic, and it proceeds rationally, but dissociated from reality. This is the delirium of madness. Foucault will say, in essence, all madness is delirium. On 99 at the bottom, the simplest and most general definition we can give of classical madness is indeed delirium. This is the truth of madness and true madness on 97. Under the chaotic and manifest delirium reigns the order of a secret delirium. In this second delirium, which is, in a sense, pure reason, reason delivered of all the external tinsel of dementia, is located the paradoxical truth of madness. Right? So, true madness is the secret delirium which reigns under the delirium of the image. It is this fully rationalized unreality, the ability to live in a world according to logic, reason, that provides this unity of mind, spirit, and soul and body, but which is still entirely unreal and false. So, right, he says, what makes this possible? How can it be that madness achieves this? It's made possible through language. Language is the way that madness is able to be manifested. It's because of what language is that madness is able to appear. On 100, language is the first and last structure of madness. Its constituent form, On language are based all the cycles in which madness articulates its nature. A little below that. If the determinism of passion is transcended and released in the hallucination of the image, if the image, in return, has swept away the whole world of beliefs and desires, it is because the delirious language is already present, a discourse which liberated passion from all its limits and adhered within all the constraining weight of its affirmation of the image which was liberating itself. It is in this delirium, which is of both body and soul, of both language and image, of both grammar and physiology, that the cycles of madness conclude and begin. This delirious discourse, this mad language, always is a possibility, right? Language is also that which exists in a sense prior to the distinction between mind and body. It is only as a condition of language, or on the condition of language, through language, that we're able to distinguish between mind and body in the first place. It's through language that all these distinctions are made. Through language that we distinguish between the real and unreal. As we've seen, language can be used to discuss both the unreal and the real, whether that's through imagination or dream, or imagination or madness. Language is kind of way that madness gets in. Overcome by the image hijacks our thinking, our discourse. It infects, as it were, language, but only because language is ripe for infection. Because language is susceptible to this kind of infection. We shouldn't even say infection, really. All right, so this gets into then the distinction between light and dark, blindness and sight, truth and reality. Right? Madness as error, madness as delirium. Right? To be mad is, in a sense, to be blind. One of the words which comes closest to the essence of classical madness, blindness, he says on 105 onto 106. It refers to that night of quasi-sleep which surrounds the images of madness, giving them in their solitude an invisible sovereignty. Like this madness, blindness is the inability to see reality. And the blindness, the unreality in which madness lives, is the way that it becomes a kind of non-being. And this will be the word that Foucault uses a little later on. Right? So this non-being that madness is begins as non-reason. On 107, meaningless disorder as madness is, it reveals, when we examine it, only ordered classifications, rigorous mechanisms in soul and body, language articulated to a visible logic. All that madness can say of itself is merely reason, though it is itself the negation of reason. In short, a rational hold over madness is always possible and necessary to the very degree that madness is non-reason. So I think this is an important thought, right? That madness reveals reason to itself as an empty formalism that only has meaning and truth where reality can be distinguished from unreality. And what reason then comes to mean is reason with respect to reality, and reason when it is elaborated in this mad discourse is then non-reason, unreason. Now, I'm going to read this section because this is really nice. On 107 going on to 108. And if now we try to assign a value in and of itself, outside its relations with the dream and with error, to classical unreason, we must understand it not as reason diseased or as reason lost or alienated, but quite simply as reason dazzled. Dazzled reason opens its eyes upon the sun and sees nothing, that is, does not see. In dazzlement, the recession of objects toward the depths of night has as an immediate correlative the suppression of vision itself. At the moment when it sees objects disappear into the secret night of light, sight sees itself in the moment of its disappearance. This is a very dense section, but I like this idea that madness is reason dazzled, right? Dazzled by the image, dazzled by this this discourse, divorced from reality, and so overcome with itself that it is blind to everything else. In dazzlement, objects recede, and when objects disappear, sight sees itself. The objects disappearing refers to the alienation of the mad person from reality. But what is revealed is sight itself, is what reality really is. That reality is not grasped through reason. And it's for this reason that Descartes needs to get rid of madness. In this sense, he says on 108, the Cartesian formula of doubt is certainly the great exorcism of madness. He is secured, Descartes, against the dazzlement of the madman who, opening his eyes, sees only night and not seeing it all, believes he sees when he imagines. Descartes wants to avoid all dazzlement, avoid madness, and engages in what on 109 Foucault calls a kind of mathesis of light, to exclude madness entirely and understand reality as reason In order to understand reality as reason, one must exclude madness, the possibility of madness. Uh, all right, let's take a break, and I'll say a little bit more about chapter 5 and chapter 4, and a little bit about chapter 5 in the next video.